Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another lesson from the Sun Devil Learning Labs from Arizona State University. My name is Michael Barker, and today we're going to work on solving two-step word problems for fractions. It's just another part in our series, primarily aimed for grade 5 students, but at whatever level you're at, I hope this you'll find the lesson helpful. Our objective, again, we're going to solve two-step word problems. So it just means that we're going to get a little more into thinking about what the question is, and we'll go back to our cubes method of looking at how we solve problems. But before we start, I've got a few little reminders that we always have. First, I want you to make sure that you're in a comfortable setting with no distractions. A lot of times we can have a little brother or sister or a pet or somebody coming in and out, and you're just not going to be able to finish your lesson in a timely manner if you have to keep stopping and pause the video. You may have to ask your parents or guardian for a little bit of help with that, but it will behoove you to make sure that you're in a setting where you can work comfortably. Second, you want to gather any supplies you might need today. I suggest a couple of pencils, a notebook, or at least several sheets of paper. Scissors and a ruler are always helpful. Sometimes when we get with the higher fractions, you may even want to consider using a calculator. I'm okay with that. But what I want to encourage you to do is make sure you have a notebook and you're keeping track of your lessons as you're going through those. That's probably the most important thing, because you can refer back to some of the other lessons that we're building on. Finally, I'd like to see you be sure and use the restroom before we start. And remember that you can always pause the video if you need to take a break. The lesson is recorded. It's not like you're going to miss something. So if you need to pause, take a break, whether it's washroom or if you have some other things you have to do, but then you can always come back and finish the lesson. So let's get started. And I've come up with a little bit of a worksheet for you. And I'd like you to take a few minutes. And all it is circling the equivalent fraction. Go through, and you should be able to knock these out in about 2 or 3 minutes based on your previous knowledge. You shouldn't have to be drawing any diagrams or anything. This should all come mathematically to you. Now, that's not to say that if you do struggle or if you need time to draw a diagram or do some math to make sense of it, take your time. It's more important to be accurate than race through it and finish. Well, now we're back, and hopefully you found your solution sheet. I'm not going to go through every one of these problems with you, but I'll provide this, and you should take a minute or so and just check your sheet against the solution that we provided. And you'll see a lot of times there's a little bit of a pattern to the problems, and we just want you to see, for example, here, we'll look at a problem here, 12/16, 9/12, and 6/8. 3 fractions, different sets of units, but they all equal 3/4. And that's something that you need to learn as you go through more practice. And it will come to you. But so hopefully you did well on this sheet. If not, just back up and try it again. There's no time limit. Okay, let's get started with our first problem today. And it's a problem about gardening. George weeded 1/5 of the garden. And Summer weeded some as well, but we don't know how much she weeded. When they were finished, 2/3 of the garden still needed to be weeded. So what fraction of the garden did Summer weed? Well, hopefully you can go into some of your problem-solving skills from a previous lesson where we used what we called cubes. And we used a part of that pattern was where we would circle the key numbers. I've used red. We'll box our action words, and with the boxing the action words, I used the yellow box. I passed up underlining the question. That's our U. And I highlighted it as well. I just think it helps me with the lesson a little better, getting it across to you. And then we'll evaluate the steps we need to take, and then we'll solve and check. So what did we notice here? The first part of the problem, George weeded 1/5 of the garden. There's a number. And when they were finished, he weeded 2/3 of the garden, still needed another number. Those are our key numbers, right? And then our question, highlighted and underlined, what fraction of the garden did Summer weed? So what are our action words? Well, we know that Summer weeded some weeds in addition, so that would be an and question. But then we have still needed. So we want to know what's our action to find out how much is left. What is still needed? We're going to probably have to do a little subtraction. So in this example, I thought it would be helpful that we could use a tape diagram. We already know what we know, right? We know that George weeded 1/5, that's this part here. We know 2/3 didn't get weeded at all. And out of the whole thing, out of our 1 unit, we're trying to determine how much Summer weeded. So really, with our tape diagram, we know the whole. We know 2 of the 3 parts, so we're only solving for 1. So I'm hoping that you were able to set up an equation where we would look something like this. Our whole is 1. We're going to subtract the 1/5 that George weeded. We're going to subtract the 2/3 that is not weeded yet. And when we do that, our unknown is going to be the part that Summer weeded. So first thing we can do is we can solve our problem a little bit simpler. We can say 1 minus 1/5. We know that's going to be 4/5. And we still need to subtract the 2/3 that hasn't been weeded yet. So now we have our fractions, but what do we notice? We don't have like units. But we also know, we've been practicing a lot, we can determine the lowest common multiple is 15. And so all we have to do is convert 4/5 minus 2/3 to units of 15. We have 12/15, that's what 4/5 becomes, minus 2/3, which will become 10/15, and we wind up with 2/15 for a solution. Now, because this was a word problem, we should probably express our solution in words and in a sentence. And quite simply, all we want to do is say, Summer weeded 2/15 of the garden. Now you've shown it numerically as well as in a sentence. So let's move to another problem. Jenny spent 1/3 of her money on a pack of pens, 1/2 of her money on a pack of markers, and 1/8 of her money on a pack of pencils. So what fraction of her money is left? Why don't you take a few minutes and see what your solution will look like, and then we'll go over how I saw it. Okay, let's look at hopefully we used our cubes method. I circled 1/3, 1/2, and 1/8 as numbers that we knew that they were important. What was our question? It was, what fraction of her money is left? Well, we knew she had sold these parts or spent these parts on school supplies. So now what we need to do is determine how much money is left. Again, I went to the tape diagram for those of you that maybe aren't comfortable yet with just doing things numerically. We are trying to work to where we can get to things numerically, but it doesn't hurt to draw the diagram, especially until you're a little more comfortable. We have 1 whole unit. Our 1 whole unit represents all of Jenny's money. And then we can just start breaking that whole unit up into what she spent. She spent 1/3 of it on pens. She spent 1/2 of her money on markers, and another 1/8 of her money on pencils. So if we want to look at it numerically, we can say we have our whole amount of money, and we're going to subtract 1/3 and 1/2 and 1/8. And that'll tell us what fraction of her money is left. I think if we look at these fractions, we should get the sense that our fraction should be fairly small. So let's take a look and see. 1 minus 1/3 minus 1/2 minus 1/8. We're going to work mathematically now because we've eliminated the tape diagram. So what do we notice about all of our fractions? They all have different denominators, but that's okay because we can find the lowest common multiple, right? And what do we find that the lowest common multiple is? You can either use your chart, you can make a chart. We could just multiply the two largest ones, 3 times 8, and get 24. I think I prefer to use a chart or make a chart till you're comfortable. But in any event, what we know now is that 1 becomes 24 24ths. And now we just have to convert our other fractions into units of 24. 1/3 becomes 8 24ths. 1/2 should become 12 24ths. And 1/8 will become 3 24ths. So now when we add 8 and 12, that's 20, and 3 is 23, we create a situation where it's 24 24ths minus 23 24ths is going to give us a final total of 1 24th. And again, it's a word problem. So what do we want to do? We want to express this in a sentence, and we can say that Jenny has 1 24th of her money left. We've solved the problem numerically at the bottom of the screen, and we've wrote our solution in a sentence. Let's look at another one. Jim sold 3/4 of a gallon of lemonade, and his friend Dwight sold some as well. Together, they sold 1 5/12 gallons. Who sold more and how much more? Okay, we've got 2 questions here, and hopefully when you look at the questions, you'll be able to work on this and circle a few things like we do in our cube methods, right? We know Jim sold 3/4 of a gallon of lemonade, and Dwight sold some as well, but we don't know how much, but we do know 1 5/12 were all together. Those are our key numbers. What's our question? Who sold more and how much more? I've also boxed off together because it wants to know and addition, how much they sold together, or how much each sold to combine for this, and how much more. So we're also going to have to do some subtraction because how much will tell us what that quantity is. So let's look at what we know so far. We have 1 5/8 gallons altogether, and we're going to subtract the known amount that Jim sold 3/4. Okay, we could draw a little tape diagram. Maybe you did. You would have 1 5/8. That's our total unit. That's everything that was sold. We know Jim sold 3/4. And our question mark is, what did Dwight sell? We're not sure, right? But okay, let's simplify now, and we can work with our fractions. 1 5/8 is the same as 8/8 plus 5/8, which gives us 13/8. And 3/4 becomes 6/8. That's our lowest common multiple, 8, correct? So what happens is 13/8 minus 6/8, 13 minus 6, 7/8. And what does this tell us? That Dwight sold 7/8 of a gallon of lemonade. But now, is that the only question we had? All we know now is how much Dwight sold. But because we know how much Dwight sold, he sold those 7/8 of a gallon, what can we do? Well, we know 7/8 Dwight's amount, and if we subtract 3/4 Jim's amount, we're going to have to find a lower common multiple again, which will be 8. So 7/8 and 3/4 will become 6/8. When we compare 7/8 minus 6/8 is going to be equal to 1/8. And what can we safely say? Dwight sold 1/8 of a gallon more than Jim. let's move on. I've come up with a couple of problems for you to work on your own. These will take a few minutes. I've got 4 of them. There's first 2 here. Christine baked a pumpkin pie. She ate 1/6 of the pie. Her sister ate 1/3 of it and gave the leftovers to his friends. What fraction of the pie did he give to his friends? And then second, Lang went to the bookstore. He spent 1/3 of his money on a pen and 4/7 of it on books. What fraction of his money did he have left? And then we'll have 2 more. Tiffany bought 2/5 a pound of cherries. Linda bought 1/10 of a pound of cherries less than Tiffany. How many pounds of cherries did they buy all together? And finally, Mr. Rivas bought a can of paint. He used 3/8 of it to paint a bookshelf. He used 1/4 of it to paint a wagon. He used some of it to paint a birdhouse, and he still has 1/8 of the paint left. How much paint did he use for the birdhouse? Take a few minutes. This will probably take you 10 minutes or so at least, and work on these, and then we'll come back and we'll go over my solutions and some of the methods that I used, and you can compare with something that you may have tried that could have been a little bit different. All right, we're back, and we're going to look at our first problem about Christine baking the pie. So I drew a circle of a pie. I know we haven't worked with too many circular area models in my lessons, but with a pie, it seemed like it was pretty simple to do. And we had 1, 2, 3 parts. And we'll look at our question. We knew our whole was going to be the entire pie. And we knew that Christine ate 1/6 of the pie. I broke 1/3 into half, which gave us 1/6. I hope you can see that there. And hopefully you drew something like this. You could have used a tape diagram as well. I didn't use that for this model because I wanted you to get the image of the pie. Now her brother, he ate 1/3 of the whole pie. So visually, I think you can already see our answer, but let's look at the numbers. We have 1 whole pie. We want to subtract the 1/6 that Christine ate, and we want to subtract the 1/3 that her brother ate. That's going to tell us how much was left for him to give away. So hopefully you can notice that our lowest common multiple is 6. If you had to do your chart or look on the charts, 1 times 6 is 6, 3 times 2 is 6. We can also simplify things a little bit more. We have our whole 1, subtract 1/6, and we get 5/6. So now we're just working with 5/6 minus 2/6, which is the 1/3, and it's converted to like units, which gives us a total of 3/6, and we can simplify that fraction to 1/2. And again, that 1/2 is what we saw in our picture. So he gave away half of the pie to his friends. All right, let's take a look at our second problem, and that was when Lang went to the bookstore. He spent 1/3 of his money on a pen, or pens, and 4/7 of it on books. So for this one, you might want to draw a tape diagram if you're still not comfortable with just doing our math. So he spent, out of the whole, he spent 1/3 on the pen, 4/7 on books, which leaves us the remaining part. They want to know how much money he had left, right? We'd like to find that out. So again, our whole is 1. That's the total amount he had. We're going to subtract 1/3, the amount spent on the pen, and then we're going to subtract 4/7. We're taking all of this away from the whole because we want to see what this last piece is. So now we can notice that our lowest common multiple, doing this mathematically, is going to be 21. But our first step, we can subtract 1/3 from 1, and that exchanges our expression to 2/3 minus 4/7. Okay, that should make our life a little easier. And when we want to change everything to 21 units. So 2/3 is going to become 14/21. Hopefully that was simple enough for you, or you used your charts. And 4/7 will be 12/21. So now we have 14 21st minus 12 21st is going to give us a total of 2 21st. So our answer is that Lang has 2 21st of his money left. Let's move to a couple of more problems. We'll move to our next problem, which was about Tiffany and her friend Linda. They bought cherries. Tiffany bought 2/5 of a pound of cherries, and Linda bought 1/10 less than that. So what we want to find out is, what did they buy together? So hopefully we can understand that this should just be, well, we have two parts to the problem, right? First, we have to find out how much Linda bought. And we know it's 1/10 less than what Tiffany bought. So 2/5 minus 1/10, that's our problem numerically. I didn't give you a number line here. If you need to draw one, or if you had to draw one, now would be a good time. But as we look forward, 2/5 is the same as 4/10, and our 1/10 is already there. Our lowest common multiple is 10. So 3/10 is the amount of cherries Linda bought. So now we know how many cherries Linda bought. We already knew how many cherries Tiffany bought. So we want to know, the answer to our question was, how many did they buy together? Well, that's going to be an addition problem of 2/5 plus 3/10. Once again, we need to look at our lowest common multiple. It's going to be 10. So 2/5 should become 4/10. Some of these should be coming automatic for you by now. And then 3/10 we don't do anything to. We're already there. So 4/10 and 3/10 is 7/10. And what is 7/10? The girls bought 7/10 of a pound of cherries. That's how many cherries they bought together, and that's the answer to question number 3. All right, let's move to our final question. And this is the one where they're talking about Mr. Rivas bought a can of paint. And he used 3/8 of it to paint a bookshelf. Okay, so he took the first 3/8 out and he painted a bookshelf. Then he took another 1/4 of it out to paint a wagon. Okay. Then he painted a birdhouse. We don't know how much paint he used, but we do know that he had 1/8 of the can left. So our question is, how much paint did he use for the birdhouse? Well, we're lucky. We know everything that we needed to know because they've told us how much our hole was. That was the gallon of paint or can of paint. And then we know how much he used for every item but one. So let's look at our hole. Then we're going to subtract 3/8 of the paint for the bookshelf. We're going to subtract another 1/4 of the can for the wagon. And we also know that 1/8 is left. So the only part in our model that we don't know is going to be what was used for the birdhouse, right? And now we've also noticed something I hope you've noticed with our fractions, and this is on your worksheet. We've got a couple of like fractions already. So we have 3/8 and 1/8. We can combine them. If we combine 3/8 and 1/8, I've circled them in blue for you, that becomes 4/8. Our expression now becomes 1 minus 4/8 minus 1/4. Again, we have to look for a lowest common multiple. I think that goes without saying that it's going to be 8. We can change our expression of 4/8 minus 1/4 to 4/8 minus 2/8. 2/8 is our remainder, and that can simplify to 1/4. So we know he used 1/4 of the can of paint for the birdhouse, and we've expressed it in a sentence as well. Hopefully your worksheet looks like this. If you had to do extra work, if you have to draw more parts, or if you have to rely on the multiplication charts more, that's fine. Our goal is to start understanding how we set up and how we develop the solutions for these problems. And that's about it for our lesson today. I know you're working diligently and studying like the student here. And I'm just like to say thank you. I appreciate your time and patience and all the help that you, excuse me, all the hard work you put into the lessons. Until the next lesson, I'll say goodbye.